Me and the family live here in Joplin, Missouri, and in 2011, we got hit pretty hard by a tornado. Thankfully, our home was only slightly damaged, nothing a little elbow grease wouldn't fix, but the power ended up getting knocked out for a couple of days after. My son was 9 years old at the time and had taken to sleeping on a cot next to our bed because he was a nervous wreck. Anyway, 2 nights after the storm, the 3 of us and our 3 dogs were all asleep in the room when I'm suddenly wakened by the sound of my son's screams. Our house was on fire. I got up and ran to the garage to get our fire extinguisher, but since the power was out and I was panicking, I couldn't find my way around my own house. Thankfully, though, my wife was quick behind me with the flashlight that we kept at our bedside, with our son close behind. I then gathered up our 2 Pomeranians and we all ran outside. We called 911 about 6 times, but emergency personnel were so thinly spread in the aftermath of the tornado that it took like 40 minutes for anyone to get out to us. We just had to sit there in the road and watch our house burn. Everything we had left went all up in smoke. With all the debris and destruction around and our house totally engulfed in the inferno, it looked like the world was truly ending. And in a way, for a while for our family, I suppose it had. I don't even know how to begin this. To be honest, I was only able to puzzle what happened a few months ago. I guess I'll start from where I believe is the beginning, but I can't assure you it was the first time I saw him. I'll keep the details pretty vague regarding where this happened as to not dox myself. I know I have pictures of my face on Reddit, but I don't feel comfortable sharing my name or the specific city I lived in at the time. Let's just say that it's in a European city, very central and very cosmopolitan. When I was about 15 years old, I was extremely interested in philosophy books. I didn't feel that I could talk to my friends about the subject without boring them. So when this man approached me on the street with a pamphlet about Plato's classes, I was pretty excited. He was about 28, maybe 30 years old, very tall and skinny, and kind of crazy eyes. I remember I was kind of a smart aleck and thought that reading 2 of his most well-known books made me interesting, so we started debating, I guess you could say. It was a nice conversation and lasted about 10 minutes, but it was getting late, so I left it at that. He told me his name, but I honestly can't remember. A couple of days after, I found him on the same street at a totally different time. It was always very crowded, so I wasn't especially spooked about it. I was getting out of the subway after classes. Mind you, I took this route every day until I graduated high school. I didn't live on that street, but that's where I got out of the subway and then waited for the bus that would get me home. I thought it was a cool coincidence that the philosophy guy was at the subway door. This time, he didn't have any pamphlets. He had a lollipop in his hand, and I know it sounds cliche, but it was so eerie to see a 6-foot guy just sucking his lollipop and looking straight at me. He said hi. I said hi back. He tried to get the conversation going, but I could feel this weird energy in the air, so I just decided to cut the conversation short. I'd see him once or twice a week, and I just assumed he lived there and happened to be going for a walk at the same time as I was getting home. I honestly believe this weird guy, twice my age, just happened to find his way to me so many times. This is until I saw him in my neighborhood. I was having coffee with a friend, and she was telling me that she met this cool guy while playing volleyball on the beach, when the guy, I kid you not, just appeared out of nowhere. He approached my friend and they talked for a bit. Yes, he was the guy she was talking about. He seemed mildly surprised that we were friends, but didn't give it much thought, so I didn't either. When he left, I started feeling uneasy, but my friend thought that he was cool, so I didn't voice my concerns. There's this thing about teenage girls that makes them think they're very mature for their age, so we just assumed that he had befriended us separately and then found out we were friends. At the time, none of us had social media, apart from WhatsApp, so I still can't understand how he managed to insert himself into my friend group. Eventually, my friend left to study abroad and the subject kind of died out. I would see the dude now and then on that same street in my commute, but we would only speak for a few minutes and that's it. This went on for about 6 months. Sometimes he would pretend he didn't know who I was, but would still approach me saying that I looked familiar. Sometimes he would greet me very warmly. Looking back, I guess he was dealing with some type of mental health problem. Slowly, he was getting bolder. One time, he asked for my number and tried to hug me. I could feel that something was very wrong, but at the same time, I thought that I was being the weird one and he was just a nice dude. Still, I just gave him a fake number. This other time, we went to a church on a school trip and he was waiting outside, talking to my peers. He played it cool, saying that he had seen my face somewhere but was not sure, as if I hadn't been seeing him almost every week for a year now. I was very stupid. I never thought about talking to my parents about this. After all, the guy wasn't violent. He wasn't mean. In my head, it was just a lonely man who happened to have a strangely similar routine. I started to be scared, though. I'd look behind my back when I was alone at night. I'd avoid dark streets. I was kind of paranoid, but still, I ignored my gut feeling and shoved it in the back of my mind. After all, as long as I gave him a few minutes of my day when he called out for me, everything would be fine. When I turned 17, I stopped seeing him. I think this went on for about a year. It was a relief, honestly. I could sense that what happened was bizarre, but I'd explain it to my friends like it was funny, like it was a joke. Eventually, I started attending college, so my everyday route changed. I stayed in the same city, though. One day, I had to go through that same street again. I can't remember why. I just know that I was walking, minding my own business. It was maybe 9 p.m., and then I turned around the corner and there he was. He saw me, smiled, and said he was lost, asked for directions, and I swear to God I felt primal fear at that moment. I felt I was dealing with a truly insane person, because we had crossed each other's paths for 2 straight years in this exact same place, and he was acting as if though he didn't know me or the intersection. Something about that messed with my mind for a while. I just kept walking. I didn't look at him, didn't utter a single word. And then he lost his mind. For the first time, I saw what he really was. He tried to grab my arm and screamed all these sorts of obscenities at me. He said that he had hoped my mom died of cancer. He said that he would kill me. I know I was not alone, as there was still quite a lot of people outside, but no one seemed to say anything. He kept screaming his lungs out, and I just started running. I ran and I started crying. I couldn't control it. And that was the last time I ever saw him. 2 years ago. He's long since stopped talking to my friend. No one knows who he is. I can't remember a name to go to the police and file a report. It's like my mind tried to erase him. He was a stellar stalker, though, because I only understood that that's what he was years after the fact. And I'm just grateful I'm safe. I'm a 21-year-old female, and this story took place when I was around 11. I remember this day clearly because it was the first time I was ever allowed to walk to school and back by myself. Up until the age of 14, I lived in what we thought was a safe place in Chautauqua County, New York. Everyone knew everyone. If you thought you would get away with something, then be prepared to have your ear abused by the time you got home. There was this one day, though. It was a cold winter day, and school unfortunately was still open, so all the neighborhood kids had to walk through knee-high inches of snow just to get to school. It took me longer to leave the house, as I was used to walking with the older sister to school since she knew the routes better than me. I always used to make fun of her for being paranoid and taking a different route every day for school, but after that day, I learned that was what saved my life. As I was waiting by the door to leave, my mom came up to me and told me that I should ride with her to drop me off because my sister was too sick to go today. Being a brat, I made a big deal about walking by myself because I was almost 12 years old, and all my friends' parents let them walk alone. She looked at me for a long time, then told me to make sure I pay attention to cars. I got hit by a car and almost died when I was 9, so the worry that showed on her face was well warranted. I hurriedly nodded and headed out the door to go to school. My sister didn't like to dilly-dally, so she was always in a rush to get to school early, but seeing as it was just me, I thought it would be a good idea to take my time. I would play in the brown slush that was left on the side of the road and even make funny-looking snowballs to see how far I can throw them. Halfway to school, I noticed a white van following me behind. Being the playful child I was, if I had not been bending down to make another snowball, I wouldn't have noticed it slowly creeping up the street. I told myself I was being stupid, but continued more hurriedly to school. Once I got to school, I took a quick glance over my shoulder and saw the van a few feet behind me. It wasn't until I was on school grounds that it drove away fast by me. I thought that that would be the end of it, but throughout the day, when I would stare out the window, the van would be there. I assumed that it never really left, just parked. Many adults would try to convince me years later that maybe it wasn't the same one, but I knew it was. This van had a bright yellow smile emoji sticker on it. I couldn't see who was in the van, but through the tinted glass, I knew they could see me. It was now the end of the day, and I wasn't ready to go home. It was too late to call my mom, because she was at work and my sister was homesick. I had to suck it up and start walking home. I tried to blend in with a group of kids, but most of them were car riders and the others didn't live near me. Remembering what my sister told me, I took another route home. I didn't memorize this route clearly, but I decided anything was better than being spotted by that van. I made it to my main street, but realized my mistake was too late. The route I took led back to the main street where I walked to school. Hidden behind a row of cars was the white van with a smiley emoji sticker. I tried to stay calm and walk past in, but once I heard the van door silently click open, I instantly ran. I could hear the rush of 2 pairs of heavy footfalls behind me. They were getting closer, so I did what any normal kid would do. I cut corners. I cut into someone's backyard until I was directly in sight of my house and forced myself into the thick snow to make it to the door. My heart was racing, not because I was running, but because I could still hear them behind me. I made it to the door and banged with all my might until someone came to the door. My sister looked confused, but one look at my face, and she pulled me inside and locked the doors. The van was still outside. Truthfully, it stayed out there until my brother got home. Me and my sister don't talk about it, but we both knew how close it was to me going missing. I hadn't thought about this incident in years, but one of my hometown friends showed me an article that came out in 2013. Apparently some men kidnapped and assaulted a girl my age. It wouldn't have scared me if it hadn't mentioned the white van. Whoever you are that attempted to kidnap me and do God knows what else, never again. I'm still shaking as I think about where I could have been right now had I not acted on a vibe I had today in a Hobby Lobby. I was at the store to indulge in the springtime sale. As I was browsing the entire store, I noticed that I kept seeing the same man wandering around. I thought that he was there with his wife until I realized he was there alone. I also noticed that he had a Bluetooth headset in his ear the entire time. Not necessarily suspicious in and of itself, but I really started to get a bad feeling when he followed me around the small floral section as I weaved through the aisles. He kept looking at random flowers when I would look at him. I even saw him either quietly talking to himself or talking to someone on his Bluetooth, most likely the latter. I circled through the store several times to make sure that he was genuinely following me and to wait for him to leave before I went to check out. After a while of not being able to see him around me, I went up to the front and got in line. He crept from around a corner and got into the line right behind me, still holding the 2 random flowers that he had picked up. The cashier rung up my items while I typed a note on my phone. I told her that I had an online coupon and showed her the note that said, "The guy behind me's been following me throughout the store." She said that she was going to get the manager to verify this coupon. The manager came up and read my note and said, "With the other sale already applied, we might not be able to apply this coupon, but let's step aside and see what we can do." She took me past the register to get the details while the cashier rung up the man. I told her everything, and I look back, and the guy is telling the cashier that he forgot something that he wanted. He then goes back to the floral section to add another random stem to his items. He looks at me, talking to the manager, and tells the cashier that he needs something else and leaves the register again to get another random item. It was at this point that I knew that he was stalling to wait for me. The manager picks up on this too and calls up a male staff member to go out to the parking lot to make sure that the man got into his car and drove away. The guy paid for his 4 random flowers and left the store. The staff member came back in and verified that he drove away and offered to be in the parking lot until I safely drove away as well. He came out with me and pretended to grab carts until I had safely made it to my car and left. I'm so thankful to the staff that immediately jumped into discreet action to ensure my safety. Now, updates, February 23rd. I have a few updates to share. After posting and getting a lot of people advising me to contact police, I did. After I told them what happened, they told me that this guy was likely part of a human trafficking team and was what they call the Scout, who was sent to find a target and was on the phone coordinating a team to grab me in the parking lot or follow me home. They said that these types of operations have specifically been targeting craft stores and places like Target, where women often go alone. They worked with Hobby Lobby and have security footage of his face and license plate. I don't know if they've identified him from this, but they've been great at keeping me updated. I also contacted Hobby Lobby corporate and gave them the store number and the names of the employees that helped me. They weren't specific, but they said that they would make sure that the employees got the recognition they deserved. Thanks to everyone who offered support and helpful advice in this situation. I just moved into a small countryside town, into a house that was just beside a huge forest. It was a new neighborhood and didn't really have much houses on my street. You could, without a doubt, walk hours into the woods and just keep going. Being young and stupid, I'd take my dog walking without having my parents with me or anything to protect me. I don't even remember having a cell phone at the time. Don't blame my parents, please. They were reassured by the fact that my dog was really big and people were easily frightened by him. Like, really easily. My dog was about 7, and this detail is important. I did that often. Nothing bad ever happened, and I never met anyone out there. I loved it because I could really take my mind off of everything else that was happening in life. The moving was rough on me, and to make everything more fun, I was being bullied at school, so of course I really needed that. And there I was, casually walking on a track that is across the woods that is used if you have a motocross or a quad. A noise that I didn't take too much attention to at first was coming from behind me, and it started to get louder. When I turn back, I can see a person coming straight on me on his motorcycle. I'm a 13-year-old girl who's scared of about everything that seemed out of the ordinary, so I decided to get off the track as quickly as I can to hide. Unfortunately for me, Henry is a large black dog and doesn't blend in well with the surrounding as everything was green and it was the middle of the day. I walked pretty fast, but I can tell that the bike was closing in quickly, and it was pretty obvious that I was standing there. I started running and found a rock that was big enough to hide my dog and I behind. I heard the motocross come and go. It was impossible for the person to really see us. I waited, telling myself that I was being silly by being paranoid about them, and when I thought that I had waited long enough, I started walking again. I froze instantly when I heard the loud engine become suddenly very close to me. Without hesitation, I started to run like a madwoman, and when I was able to stop and hide, I finally did. My dog wasn't in the best of shape, and I was feeling so bad for making him run that much. I could tell he was getting closer and closer to me. It wasn't a very dense forest, so he could follow very easily, and he was so much faster. I'm also a very clumsy person. I tripped on about everything I can, so I did meet this lovely branch that I fell on the ground pretty hard after tripping on it. But I think I was so full of adrenaline that I just got up and started running again. He was only meters from me, so he could see me, and he's clearly at this point chasing after me. There's no doubt in my mind that if he gets me, something really bad could potentially happen. We were approaching a more dense part of the forest, so the guy had no choice but to stop. It did give me advantage on him, and I was able to get away. I was so glad when I saw a house. It was under construction, so nobody lived in it. I did find a hiding spot between its fence. Minutes later, I heard the bike show up and saw the person searching around for me. And I could tell that he didn't see where I went to. I felt this huge sense of relief when he started to blaze off again. And I think I hid there for about 30 to 40 minutes without moving to make sure that he never looped back. I did find my way home and told my parents about it, but they thought that I was just being overly dramatic. In the end, I never found out who this person was. And I did hurt myself, but nothing too seriously. I heard years later about certain people selling things and being grown in that part of the woods, and certain cameras around the woods as well. Maybe I came too close to seeing something I shouldn't have, and they saw me on the cameras and were coming to apprehend me. When I was about 15 to 16, I was a real party animal. Always the next town over at my friends' places. Most of the time I was able to stay at their place overnight and head home the next day, but there were a few occasions where I found myself walking home. This walk was roughly 2 to 3 hours. If it was a nice night, I didn't mind it at all. It gave me a chance to sober up before I got home. No, my parents didn't know that I was doing this. It was just me being a stupid teenager. At the time, there was a good 40-minute stretch that was pitch black, with nothing but fields and forests on either side of the road. It has since been developed into a shopping center and homes. Every now and then, a car would pull over asking if I needed a ride home. Most times I would say no thank you and go on my way with no issue. 2 times, cabs had offered a ride home for a discounted price, and they were both amazing people. They told me about their wives and kids and how I should be really careful walking alone at night. They dropped me off at my house and made sure I got in before driving away. One night, walking home on that stretch of dark road, minding my own business, a car pulled over in front of me. Not a big deal, this has happened before. As I was about to walk past the passenger side, the window rolled down. A guy who seemed to be in his mid-30s asked if I was alright. He was very clean, handsome, and his car looked brand new. He had a smile on his face and a weirdly friendly tone. Every hair on my body started to stand up. This seemingly normal guy was giving me one of the worst gut feelings I had ever gotten in my whole life. I backed up from the car as he spoke to me. Being polite, I told him I was alright and not too far away from home, but thanked him for his concern. The smile never left his face, but it was just wrong, like it was being forced. He insisted that he could drive me home, then said, "There's some scary people in this world," and laughed. By this point, my body is screaming that I need to get away from this person. I faked a smile, thanking him again, saying goodbye and good night. I started walking away, pulling out my phone and pretended to call a friend. He sat in that spot for a little while before slowly creeping up beside me again, still giving me that weird smile. "Are you sure I can't drive you home?" I lied, saying that I was just talking to my friend and that he was on his way, keeping my distance from the car. "You can wait in the car with me," he said with a bit of an odd tone in his voice. Yet again, I declined his offer. My skin was crawling, and I'm sure you could hear the nerves in my voice. I continued with my fake phone call, loudly saying, "Oh, you're a few minutes away? Great, you'll see me." The driver's face went completely blank. His smile had gone, not a single emotion in sight. He just looked forward and rolled up his window and started driving away. I waited till he was out of sight before running as far away from that road as I could. I made it home safe that night, although the rest of the walk I was completely on edge, constantly looking over my shoulder and holding my phone up to my ear like I was talking to someone. Obviously, I can't ever really know what his intentions were, but if my gut was anything to go off, I truly feel like if I got in that car, I would never go home again. I'm a court clerk. I work for my local courthouse. I work in the clerk of courts, the COC, both in the office and in court, split about half and half time-wise. On Friday, the 4th of February 2022, I was in the office at my desk. I also will assist with customers who come into our office who have questions on certain types of filings. I am the backup coverage specifically for our records window. In my state, we're considered public records. Anyone can come in and request copies from any case, unless it's juvenile, confidential, or sealed by the court. This is really important to the whole story. I was asked to cover the records desk from 4 to 4:30 p.m. last Friday so our records clerk could leave a little early. No problem. I have no issues helping out where I can. Around 4:15, we had a frequent flyer, as we have so dubbed them, and this man comes in frequently to get copies out of his case. I should really note the way my office is set up. It's a bit important. We're set up kind of like the DMV. You have to come into the main entrance of security, go down a long hallway, and it opens up to a lobby. There are elevators straight ahead. The DA's office is to the left and COC is to the right. You have to open up a separate set of doors into our little lobby. There is a counter with windows, and it's an L shape. If I can figure out how to attach a drawing, I will. The records window is around the corner, tucked in the back. There are also 3 public terminals where any member of the public can use to research cases in my county. So back to the man, we'll just call him Joe. Joe has an open family case. He comes in probably once a week to get copies out of his family case, or I don't know what he's doing. It's really none of my business. He came up to my window somewhere around 4:15 to 4:20, said he'd requested some documents. When documents are requested from the public terminals, they go to a queue, which I then go into and select them to print. I went into the queue, glanced at the documents, and asked, "Did you have 11 pages?" He said yes, so I selected and printed. I wrote him a little slip out with the number of copies and his total owed. I gave him the slip, directed him to go back to window 4 to 5 for cashiers for payment, and would meet him up there. I went to grab the copies off the printer, which jammed, messed with that for a minute, counted the pages, and took them to the cashier. I then went back to my counter to help the next person in line. The next customer was easy. Her records were prepaid and printed. After the second customer was after 2:25 p.m. My coworker, a work wife, we'll call her Lynn, asked me if I wanted to go thrifting for clothes at Plato's Closet after work, and my answer was, of course, let's go. Right as we're discussing this, I'm in view of the records window, but not at it. I saw that Joe had returned to my counter. I went up to the counter and asked how I could help him, and he stated, "You must be new." I'm not new. I've been at my job for almost 4 years and in the legal field for almost 10. I replied, "No, I'm not. How can I help you?" He then made a comment about a paperweight I was using. It was a gift for my niece, a painted rock from a 3-year-old. "That's a fancy paperweight you have there." "Sir, what can I do for you? You gave me the wrong case." "No, sir. I printed off what was in the queue. So you don't need these 4 pages?" I tossed the 4 pages and then adjusted his slip, 7 pages total, and I sent him back to the cashier. At this point, it's 4:30. It's Friday, and we're closed. I left and headed to Plato's Closet. It took me about 15 minutes to drive over there. I sat in my car for a few minutes, then went inside, and I beat Lynn there. I started browsing, and she came in a couple of minutes later, stating she got caught behind a train, so we started shopping and chatting, of course. For some reason, I looked at the door when it opened. There was Joe. Now I knew it was Joe because he wears that dumb sock monkey hat. I saw him and got Lynn's attention. Are you seeing what I'm seeing?" So I pulled Lynn into an aisle and we ducked down. She's short. I'm tall and I wear heels a lot. I could watch his dumb hat around the store. He immediately went to the back of the store. It looked like he was rubbernecking the whole store. So he goes to the back of the store, grabs a pair of shoes, glances at them, and continues rubbernecking. I continued to watch him, and as he moved, we moved opposite. We were legitimately hiding behind clothing racks. He moved around the perimeter of the store, continuing to search around, rubbernecking as we said, and looking for something or someone. So he leaves, and we kind of freak out. We check the parking lot to make sure he's gone. We try and shake it off and chalk it up to just coincidence. And then I realized we were talking about it literally in front of him. And Lynn, she's not quiet. She gets scolded on a weekly basis for her loud, carrying voice. I told the cashiers what happened. We ended up leaving like an hour later. The next day, I felt so uneasy about it. I called my boss and told her what had happened and told her I was going to call the police. I called the non-emergency number and left a message with dispatch. I got a call from an officer a few hours later and explained what happened. He said to get Joe's name. At this point, I recognized him, but didn't know Joe's name offhand. He told me he would call me back on Wednesday when he was back on duty. I got Joe's name and called the officer back on Monday and left a voicemail. Monday was fine. Tuesday I was out of the office, but Wednesday, Joe came back Wednesday. He came at 4:20 to file documents into his case. He took 20 minutes to file 2 affidavits and a motion. It should have been like a minute, 2 because he needed something notarized. He left and I had a bad feeling. I called the officer and told him what happened. The officer said he comes back Thursday to call and they would come down and talk to him. The police department is across the street from the courthouse. Thursday rolls around, no Joe. Until 4:25, he beelined it for the computer in the corner, and I messaged my boss. We had already put into place a safety plan. The sheriff's deputies who work security were notified. 3 deputies followed him into the office. I called the PD. 2 officers came down, and they questioned him. He admitted to being at Plato's Closet. He was shopping for his 2 younger daughters who were 9 and 11. They don't fit into clothes at Plato's yet. Plato's has a sister store, Once Upon a Child. Those kids don't really fit there either. So he had a receipt in his car for Once Upon a Child for 5:07 p.m. that day. He denied hearing my conversation with Lynn, the whole going to Plato's after work. He stated he left my office at 4:15-ish and took his children shopping for clothes. He didn't have his children with him at the courthouse or Plato's. He also asked the officer immediately and unprompted, "Did she call you?" He also stated that he believed his ex-wife was setting him up. So because my office is a public office and he has made arguably legitimate reasons to come into my office, there's nothing the officers could do. They issued him an oral warning and put him on standby. The kicker is, he could opt into his case electronically, but made a big deal about not being able to opt in a few months ago. We told him if he's having issues, call the court support line and they would be able to remedy the situation. Instead, he chooses to come in and pay $125 per page instead of a one-time $20 fee, which apparently he also paid that. If you weren't already freaked out, last year his roommate filed a restraining order against him, followed by his roommate's girlfriend alleging harassment. I won't go into details about the family case. Let's just say it's more than messy. He is also filing extremely high-level types of documents for representing himself. Now, a February 11th, 2022 update. I was in court all day. Come down to my desk at 4:05. He came in at 4:10 p.m. I left while he was still at the office. Now, what am I supposed to do? The officers can't do anything else. I need another incident outside my office to file a restraining order. I've ordered home security, I've signed up for self-defense classes, and I'm purchasing mace and looking into handguns. I just don't know what to expect with this guy. We all make dumb decisions in life, but in this case, I was stupid. Very stupid. I arranged to meet a guy off Tinder, but because of my heightened anxiety about driving, I arranged for him to pick me up outside my place. I had been talking to him for a few weeks at least, but that is not redeemable, and I know that. The choice I made on this day could have ended me, but thankfully I'm still around to tell the tale. The guy picked me up in his car and told me he planned to take us out for sushi. I love sushi, so I thought, great. He put in the name of the restaurant into his GPS and we were off, making pleasant conversation on the way there. Until I started seeing woods when I looked out my window. I felt very confused. We were supposed to be going into town, not into the wilderness in the middle of nowhere. And fear hit me hard then. He said, "I swear the GPS is taking me through here. I didn't choose this path. Just please take me back to civilization," I said. My eyes were wide and I must have looked like a deer in headlights. His face was really apprehensive, so he must have known that I was scared completely crazy. Oh my God, I thought to myself. I should have just conquered my anxiety about driving and met him somewhere public. Or, better yet, not met with this guy at all. What was I thinking? I'm gonna get murdered here in these woods. I tried checking my phone to see if I could assist him with the GPS, and that's when he said those spine-chilling words. There's no signal out here." I remember just thinking to myself to try to look calm. Don't let him think you suspect he's onto something. But man, did I feel terrified. The tips of my fingers were cold while I was simultaneously sweating. If he was going to kill me, part of me wanted him to get it over with so I wouldn't be left in anticipation. His forehead was perspiring. He kept saying, I swear I'm not doing this. I'm trying to get us back on route to the sushi place." I said, I don't care about sushi anymore. Get us to a gas station. Just anywhere with people at this point." And he responds, "I don't have a shovel or a weapon or anything if that's what you're thinking." Which did little to calm my nerves. We finally reached the restaurant after what felt like an eternity. I'd never been so scared in my life. I didn't have much of an appetite and I was physically trembling when we arrived. But I figured he didn't kill me when he had the chance, so I guess it was safe now to continue with our date. I already planned on taking an Uber home because I didn't want to go through that experience again. I was shocked out of my mind when he then asked, "So you want to go back to my place?" I nearly choked on a piece of sashimi. What? I didn't know where this was coming from, and I didn't know how he could ask me something like this now on a first date when he literally saw me pale as a ghost just moments ago. Like, how long will you make me wait before we, get it on? A day? A week? A month? I stared at him, dumbfounded. I couldn't respond because I was utterly speechless in that moment. "Well, I can't wait a whole month. I'm telling you now," he said. I didn't say anything and the rest of the date was just insanely awkward. I said goodbye as I took my Uber home, and only seconds after my driver pulled out of the restaurant parking lot, he texted me to say that he doesn't think it'll work out with me because he needs a girl with a higher libido. I didn't argue. I just texted back a simple okay, ready to be done with this man. When the Uber driver drove me home, he didn't take me through the wilderness pathway of a potential murder site. He took me through the streets, other cars, lights, the sweetest scene to my immense relief. I couldn't help but wonder why my date had to take me through an hour drive through the wilderness to get to the restaurant, but it only took the Uber driver 15 minutes to get me home from the same location. The whole thing was chilling. I don't know if my date planned on anything sinister or if it was an honest mistake, but I am glad I made it out alive. I learned a tough lesson that night, one that I should have already known but that I foolishly ignored for some reason. Don't let strangers from a dating app pick you up in their cars. I'm a 19-year-old female when this happened. I attended a church most of my life where the people there were more like family. My sister, who I was always very close to, was 18, and there was a new guy that started coming. He was about 28. He was in the middle of getting his degree and looked like he had a good head on his shoulders, but something seemed off about him. It appeared that I was the only one who felt this way. I observed him running after a group of children, and the pit of my stomach would just feel sick. He seemed to have an attention for my sister too. She was 18, but always looked younger for her age. He would always have a sick smile on his face when talking with her. Again, nobody else seemed to notice but me. Another woman from the church commented to me that the guy seemed like a good catch, and we should set them up on a date together. I opened up about my suspicious feelings to my mom and to a few others, but they would laugh it off as me being jealous. I would have nightmares about warnings that my sister needs to stay away from him. I would learn later that my sister went on a secret date with him, actually, and this guy insisted that they meet at her house. He wanted her address, but she said no, that we'll just meet at a public place. Soon after, the pastor's wife mentioned to my mom after church that this guy had been to jail for inappropriate actions against a child. He was out on probation and trying to get his life together. My mom felt sick after that. She gave me a huge apology, and now my feelings made sense. My sister was afraid of him now, but didn't want to let on that she knew what he did. He wanted a second date, but I was with her when she told him she was just too busy with college. He thankfully let her alone and soon left the church. And I had heard very soon after that he was rearrested for doing the same thing to a teenager. I ended up leaving that church for good. Someone else could have been hurt because this was kept secret, but they wanted to help rehab him somehow. And I learned a valuable lesson, that you always trust your instincts.
My stepmom didn't like us much, but she told my older sister and I this experience growing up to scare us out of being stupid. It was my family's stranger danger story. My stepmom, Macy, grew up as kind of a privileged teen in the 70s, and her mom had moved their family over to the States from England when she was about 9. She went to a pretty nice high school in a nice town. There, she made friends with a girl, Lily, who didn't exactly run with Macy's type of crowd. They really hit it off, and Lily would take Macy out to do her type of stuff, hiking, fishing, and sailing. Anyways, because of Lily's influence, the two of them would do stuff like that a great amount. One Sunday, they decided to go hike in some hills about an hour away. Macy put on what I'm sure were her extremely expensive hiking shoes, and the two of them drove off to the hiking trails. Lily parked in this big clearing with makeshift parking spots, but there were no other cars there. This was only important in hindsight. They started hiking up the hill off the path because Lily fancied herself as something of a badass. The hike was nothing extraordinary. Anyway, they reached the top of the hill and my stepmom was done. The polished, pampered side of her was coming out. She groaned until Lily said okay. They would rest and then walk down again, slower. They had been heading down the hill for maybe 10 minutes when Macy started whining again. Lily conceded to walking down the side of the road instead of the rough hiking trail. So, there they are, probably looking like a couple of tools, geared up for hiking and walking down a crappy road. And after not even 5 minutes, a truck pulled up next to them. It was red and rusty and just generally looked like a clunker. The guy driving rolled down the window and the girls looked in through the passenger side window. He had a big beard, a baseball cap pulled down, and long brown hair. He greeted them and even smiled through his beard, asking if they needed a ride. Macy described him as charming and even cute. Lily still says the moment he greeted them, her hackles went up. Despite her better judgment, my stepmom convinced her to get in the truck. It must only be a 10-minute drive down to the car, tops, she told her. The two girls opened the passenger side door to this rusty old thing, and the guy directed them behind the seat to get in the back. They settled in and the truck started rumbling forwards. Lily always says that was the point that hit her what a mistake they just made. The back seat was clean enough, but there was a rope on the floor behind the driver's seat and 4 boxes of saran wrap half hanging out from under the passenger seat. It seemed creepy and weird, but Lily didn't want to freak my stepmom out, so she just kept her mouth shut. After 10 minutes, the woods didn't look any clearer, and they hadn't seen another car the whole time. Lily asked how long he thought it would be. He said he was taking a different route down the hill and had to stop somewhere to get something first. That was it. The girls were 16, and Lily didn't want to have to press the issue. She was scared. She can remember his hair because she was sitting right behind him. He looked like a woodsy guy, but his hair was super tangled and dirty. She noticed crusted mud on his collar and tried to find something identifiable about him, but she just got scared the more she picked up on the little details. He was youngish, strong-looking, and had a foot on both of them, so they didn't ask any more questions and he didn't offer any information. They just drove on. Several minutes after that, they reached a tiny shack cabin-looking place right there in the clearing of trees. There was an old stump where someone had been chopping wood, and a huge axe stuck into the log. Lily was definitely on red alert now. The guy turned off the truck and slipped out of it, saying, "I'll be right back. Don't get out." And he disappeared into the house. Lily tried to talk to my stepmom about how incredibly uncomfortable she was, but she mostly just dismissed it. Lily started begging, increasingly freaked out, and finally put her foot down, demanding Macy exited the truck with her. So, they got out and walked around the front of the vehicle. The house was about 50 yards in front of them, and they wandered around looking at it hesitantly. If this guy really was decent and just trying to give them a ride, it would be super rude just to run off, right? My stepmom had this strict upbringing when it came to manners and a public persona. She saw it as an issue of that nature, so she actually started to head back to the truck, opening the front door to climb in behind the driver's seat. Lily was pissed off and followed her to yell some more. On the driver's side floor, hidden under the seat, there was a big hatchet. It had dried reddish-brown stains covering the blade and stuck to the floor under it. Lily understandably lost it, and seeing it, my stepmom started getting hysterical. They decided that leaving was by far their best option at this point. They just booked it off to the side of the property into the trees. They bumbled around in the trees for a little while until Lily was fairly confident that they were on their way back down the hill. My stepmom cried the whole way down. Lily felt bad about it, but was also completely freaked out that he would hear it and kept trying to calm her down. When they finally got back down to the bottom and saw the old wooden fence that surrounded the original parking area, they were relieved. But as they got closer, they saw it, the truck. It was parked on the other side of the gravelly makeshift lot, just sitting there, facing the other way innocently. They couldn't see if anyone was in it, and of course, Macy wanted to run for the car, but Lily was hesitant. She managed to calm my stepmom down, saying she wanted to wait before running out into the open to see what was out there. Remember, this is the 70s. There were no cell phones. There was no ranger station or anyone around. The parking lot was big, empty, and open, and who knows what would have happened had they decided to stroll across it. Thankfully, Lily convinced my stepmom to chill, and the two of them hunkered down against a big tree, hidden by the bushes and other trees. They waited it out for what seemed like to be a couple of hours, when dark started to fall. All the animals started coming out and making noises, and my stepmom started getting antsy about this and bothering Lily, who was tired and moments away from giving in. She was just planning their dash to the car when they heard a clunk. Across the twilight-lit lot, they watched as one of the back doors of their car swung open. The bearded guy slid his way out of the back seat. He got out, shut the door, looked around at the surrounding woods for several minutes, and then walked back to his truck. The truck lumbered past their car and out of sight. Several minutes after watching him drive away, they sprinted to their car as fast as they could, jumped in, and peeled out before they had even shut the doors. Lily grew up to be a badass adult. She does stuff like hike mountains and stuff, but with her dogs now. My ex-stepmom grew a brain at some point in her life, and isn't as derpy or terrible as she was sheltered. And thanks to her, I always check my back seat before I get into my car.
Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/Let'sReadOfficial, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks offered for the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast where you can hear all these stories in big compilations and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And do you remember the transcript of Gargalon? Gargalon D's nuts.
This happened 24 years ago in July of 1996. I had finished my term of service for the Army. I was stationed at Fort Hood, Texas, and decided at midnight that I would out-process and travel back to Wisconsin. All day, I was so anxious to go that I actually had trouble sleeping. Finally, at 23:45, I got out of bed and went to sign out with the desk sergeant. Of course, knowing people wanted to sign out at midnight, he decided to do his rounds. You can't actually leave until you get your final sign-off with the sergeant and turn in your room key. So I waited and I waited, and finally, at about 2:45, he returned. I turned my key in, got the sign-off, and at 3:30, I was on my way. At first, I was so full of adrenaline that I felt like I could drive for days. Unfortunately, though, that adrenaline didn't last that long, and by the time that I was getting through Dallas, I was sort of nodding off. So I decided just past Denton that I should pull over at the next rest stop and take a quick nap until the sun came up. And at this stage, I could barely keep my eyes open when I came up to a stop. I pulled over and I got out of my car to get some fresh air and throw something away and to get a bit of a look at my surroundings. There were only about 3 other cars and 2 semi-trucks there. It was one of those picnic stops, I think, and not a rest stop, so no restrooms. But I threw my trash away and I glanced at a poster of a few missing persons, but I really didn't pay much attention to it. I went back to my car, which was a basic Geo Metro. No radio, no power windows, no power locks. I just cracked the windows and I turned on the boombox that I had for some tunes and lay down to get some sleep. Now, I must have been asleep for maybe 5 or 10 minutes, I would say at most, when I felt my car shake just slightly. I cracked an eye open and looked and didn't see anything, so I just blew it off as maybe a gust of wind or something and went back to sleep. I then heard, though, what sounded like my door handle being pulled and scratching on the door key. I then sat up quickly, but I didn't see anyone there again. I looked at all the windows and I didn't see anyone. So, again, I sort of just shrugged it off as me being tired, and I laid back down and turned up the radio. Being a Texas night in July, it was actually pretty hot, but I was so tired that I just laid back down. A few more minutes later, I heard the door handle again, though, and the car really shook this time. I sat up quickly, and I saw a man standing at the passenger side looking in. Even though it was really hot and humid, he was wearing a red sweatshirt with the hood up, and I couldn't actually see his face. Being young and stupid, though, and just out of the military, I yelled at him, "What the heck do you want?" He just stared at me, so, like an idiot, I got out of my car. Mind you, I'm only 5'6", but man, was I angry. And he just walked off towards the picnic tables, like nothing happened. All the while, I'm yelling at him that if he came back, that I would take him out. I decided at this point that I would just drive on from there. So I got back in and I just went on my way. And even though I was really upset, only about 10 miles down the road, I was just super tired again. Luckily though, about another 10 miles down I-35 there was another picnic stop. Not sure why North Texas doesn't have rest areas, but for some reason they just don't seem to. But I pulled into the second picnic stop and I backed into a spot just in case I needed to leave quickly again. Not sure why, but there was only one other car there and no semi-trucks this time. I again locked the doors, cracked the windows, and I turned on my boombox again. I fell asleep right away, and about 30 minutes later, I hear a loud thud on my driver's side window. I jumped up and looked around, but there was nobody there. This time, I got out of the car, which was very stupid of me, but I had my macho military attitude going, but again, nobody was around. I sort of just assumed that it was my nerves from the other stop, so I got back into my car, made sure to double check the doors were locked again, and closed my eyes. This time, I was too amped to fall asleep though, so I just laid there with my eyes closed, when suddenly I felt like somebody was looking at me or watching me, and so I opened my eyes. I saw that same guy standing there again with the red sweatshirt, hood up. I couldn't see his eyes, but I could see that he was smiling at me this time. I popped up quick and I tried quickly to open the door and bump him, and being a cheap geo since the doors were locked, it didn't open. He walked backwards, still staring at me, and by the time that I got out, he was about 30 feet away, facing me. It was fairly dark, but as I looked him over, he looked really skinny, but must have been about 6'2", maybe 6'3", but I still felt like I could take him with my military experience. He was wearing the red hooded sweatshirt, blue jeans, and green tennis shoes, and for some reason I thought the shoes looked a bit odd. And as I was standing there, I could see something shine every now and then as he stood there just sort of staring at me. I believed in that moment that it may have been a machete. I quickly reached into my back seat and grabbed my baseball bat and started yelling at this guy to come get some. I'm not sure why I did that, but he actually started walking towards me, and I took a few steps towards him, not really thinking. As I got about 5 feet from my car, he was about 15 feet from me. A yellow van pulled up real quick and parked just off to the side of my car. I finally realized what was really happening, and I saw two guys, also wearing hooded sweatshirts, in the van. Before they could get out, I ran back to my car. I had left the keys in the ignition. Since I had backed in, I was able to cut out a hard right and peeled my car out of there as quickly as I could. I was actually pretty lucky too, because being a manual car, I didn't stall the car because the other two guys were out of the van, and the first guy was just about to my car when I finally got out of there. I jumped back on the interstate, and I didn't stop until I was about 20 miles into Oklahoma. I eventually stopped for gas, and I used the restroom there, and in the restroom I noticed that same flyer I barely glanced at in the first picnic stop. It was basically a flyer with like several missing persons on it, and then I noticed too that it was warning people not to stop for long periods of time at the rest areas, and it described a possible suspect as being possibly 6 foot, wearing blue jeans, green shoes, and a red hooded sweatshirt. And upon seeing that, I went completely white. Needless to say, since it was daylight, I just drove the rest of the way to Wisconsin, wide awake after that. To this day, I'm really not sure why, but I never reported it to the number on the flyer or told anyone about it. But I now live in North Texas and pass those 2 picnic stops every day on my way to work, and I must admit that I think about it quite often. I often wonder if maybe they got anyone else or if they were caught. I did try looking it up at one point, but I couldn't really find any stories about it on the internet. In the 1970s, I lived in what I believed to have been a haunted house. It was apparently widely known in our town, but our family had just moved into it, so we had no idea, but I learned later that it was apparently haunted. In fact, the personal people that had been living in it before us supposedly moved out because she was having problems with frightening incidences in the home. Of course, our parents didn't tell myself or my little sister this information, as they believed that we were just too young and impressionable. They didn't want to scare us, nor did they want us to blow things out of proportion. In the end, though, they didn't have to tell us, especially not me. I figured it out rather quickly on my own, in fact. My first experience that I just couldn't explain happened on a bright weekday afternoon. My sister and I were pretty much latchkey kids, as our parents both worked. At this time, my sister was like 6 years old and I was 11. We rode the school bus home and we went inside to have a snack and do our chores and whatnot. Once done, my sister went to the neighbor girl's house to play and I decided to take a shower. Now, let me reiterate too that I was completely alone in this house at this time. It was an old home, built back in the early 1900s. It is possible that it was maybe very late 1800s. I recently saw an image of the house that was taken in 1901, so I'm not 100% sure of the exact age. But it was large and 3 stories high. Upstairs held the bathroom and 3 bedrooms. Above, through a door in the ceiling in the bathroom, there was an attic. And I went into said bathroom and I climbed into the shower and began washing off the dust and the grime from a long day at school. I was just sort of lost in thought, as one often is in the shower, and scrubbing my hair with Prel, when suddenly there was a loud knock at the bathroom door 3 times. Startled, I said, "What? I'm in the shower." I was annoyed because I was pretty sure that it must have been my little sister having come in from outside to use the bathroom. But ultimately, there was just no answer. What the heck, right? I ignored the issue though, and I just continued washing my hair. After a minute or so, and just as I began to rinse, another 3 loud knockings at the door. This time, I jumped too because it was totally unexpected. My eyes were full of soap bubbles though, and I was now very irritated. So I yelled, "Nicole, what the heck do you want? I'm in the shower." I strained to hear my sister through the bathroom door, but there was no answer and no sound. It felt to me though as if someone was listening. "Quit screwing around," I shouted. I quickly rinsed off and, leaving the shower running, very carefully stepped outside the curtain, making sure not to alert anyone who might be listening. I wrapped a towel around me and waited to catch whoever was out there. I stood right at the door, my hand poised to grab the knob. I stood there for some time too, and as you might have guessed, nothing happened. I sort of mumbled to myself and climbed back into the shower, but the very second the water hit my face, there was a knock at the door again, 3 times. This time, the knocks were clearly deliberate too, but how did whoever was out there know that I climbed back into the shower? This was weird now, and even I knew it. I turned the shower water off and I yelled, "Who is it?" And the second the last word tumbled out of my mouth, 3 knocks again. In one fluent motion, I pulled the curtain around me and leaned out of the tub, grabbed the doorknob and yanked the door open. The door was literally right next to the bathtub. And when I did, there was nobody there. No one. No giggling little sister who was not interested really in playing elaborate pranks anyway. She was only 6 after all. No parents, no friends, nothing. Upon seeing this too, I threw on my robe, ran into my parents' room and I looked around. Then my bedroom and my sister's next. But there was nobody upstairs with me. I would have heard and seen anyone on the stairs too. They were old and they creaked terribly. It was at this point too that I was suddenly quite scared. Something had been clearly knocking on the door. Whatever it was, it wanted my attention. Suffice it to say too that it definitely got it. I quickly made my way downstairs, and as I passed the window on the landing, I saw my sister and her little friend playing Barbies on the porch outdoors. But I'm certain that it hadn't been my sister. This, as I said, was only the first experience that I had in that house. There were several others in that house, one of which actually could have killed my sister, but maybe I'll share that another time. This will have to do for now, as it's a lot to think about.
Creepy Hermit Encounter. Submitted by Jordan. I live in Burlington, Ontario, a nice lakeside city near Toronto. This story happened to me during a school trip when I was in the 8th grade. At my elementary school, which by the way was Catholic, everyone in grade 8 would get to go on 2 trips as part of their final year at the school. One trip took place in the fall, and it was usually a religious camping trip that took place about 40 minutes out of the city. By religious, I mean everyone had to participate in group activities that revolved around being a good Christian and teamwork. This, of course, completely sucked at this camp. It was little more than a religion class stretched over 3 days. The second trip took place in the spring, and was usually a trip to Ottawa for the weekend, where we could explore the city and visit museums. For some reason, it was decided my year would instead take another camping trip, about 4 hours away at Algonquin Provincial Park. The camp was on one of the many lakes in the park, and was set up like your pretty typical summer camp. Cabins were spread out near the lake, and partially in the forest, and there were bathrooms and a mess hall in separate buildings. As you would guess, boys and girls shared separate cabins. The girls' cabins were built on supports above the ground, and were closer to the lake. Our cabins were almost in the forest, and built on the ground along a gravel road. I shared a larger cabin with about 4 other guys. Although ours was the largest, it was probably the least comforting. While the other cabins had actual windows and doors that would fully close and lock, our cabin looked like it was built from balsa wood, only had thin bug screens for windows, and a door that wouldn't completely close. I should also point out that I had no experience with actual camping, as my family hated it, so this was a pretty bad first impression. This is where the creepy part of the story starts. On the first evening, we were all gathered outside the mess hall for a fun night activity. The camp counselors told us about a hermit that lived in the nearby woods. The activity was that they were going to take us into the dark woods in groups to see where the hermit lived. This kind of caught us by surprise, as it was kind of random, but intriguing at the same time. As you would expect, everyone was pretty much screaming as we were led deeper into the woods with only our flashlights, looking for this hermit's house. When we finally came across the house, which was little more than a huge log with a makeshift bed, we were led back to camp. Although my group didn't see anything, other people started talking about seeing someone creeping around the dark woods. Someone in my cabin even said they saw blue glowing eyes in the forest. I shrugged it off, thinking the whole hermit story was made up by the camp to scare us, and the person in the woods was probably just a counselor. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of someone sprinting down the gravel road near our cabin. At first I was startled, and then a little creeped out, but then I thought it may have just been some animal. That wasn't until I started hearing the gravel crunch around our cabin. It was very soft, but definitely a person outside. I was suddenly terrified. My bed was right beside the door that didn't lock. An animal could have easily pushed the door open on its own and walked inside if they wanted to. There was also nothing covering the screens, so the person outside could clearly see in. I was ready to scream as loud as possible if someone entered the cabin. I had my eyes locked on the door, anticipating to see it slowly open, but it never did. The sound outside slowly disappeared into the woods. Immediately, I thought it must have been the hermit. I ruled out the possibility of it being a counselor or teacher, because it was at least 3 in the morning, which was a terrible time to check on the students. Surprisingly, I was able to fall back to sleep a short while later. That was the only interesting part of the camping trip, unfortunately. The rest of the trip was pretty dreadful. It rained non-stop for the remaining days, and a few people from my class caught the flu from another school that was sharing the camp with us, so the bus was partially quarantined on the way back home. As time passed, I mostly forgot about the creepy encounter, giving in to the possibility that it was just a counselor checking on us. The story doesn't end there, though. The following year, it was my younger sister's turn to go on the same 8th grade trip. Just like for my class, she also had to go on the weird hermit expedition during the first night. Although she initially thought nothing of it, during one of the other days when she and a few friends went exploring in the woods along the lake, she described seeing a small hermit-like person sitting on a log in the distance. I know this isn't the scariest camping story to be told, but it creeps me out knowing that the hermit was indeed real, and that the camp thought it was fun or funny to lead a bunch of kids to this random person's house in the middle of the woods. It's also a delight to know that the hermit also isn't afraid to peek on unsuspecting campers in the dead of night. It's been almost 10 years since this happened, and I haven't done anything camping related since. My Experience in Algonquin National Park by Ike. I was taking a school trip with about half of my grade through the forests of Algonquin National Park. It's a huge provincial park where you're surrounded by water and trees and pretty much nothing else. The wildlife there flourished, and everything is secluded from our present society. In other words, there's no signal on your cell phone for the most part, no buildings, no nothing. We stayed there for a week with 2 guides and 6 other guys my age. The first day was great. We got to this camp that my school was hosting. I remember the lake water and trees and the beautiful cabins that we slept in for the night. Nothing too interesting happened that day. We got there and set up for the week. When we woke up, we headed down to the main lodge for breakfast and then set off for the water. On our second full day there, we were canoeing. I think we were doing it for about 5 or 6 hours. I didn't have a phone or watch with me, so I had to use the sun to guess. By the time we found a nice spot to sleep for the night, it was really dark. We set up our tents and got ready for dinner. On my way through the forest looking for twigs and branches for kindling, I spotted the most curious-looking animal. It stood like a person, but had the hide of a deer, and the head of it was like a wolf and deer mixed together. The moment I saw it, my body kicked into some primal fear mode. I stayed absolutely still, and my breathing went so quiet that I couldn't even feel or hear it. I was alone in the woods with this thing, my camp a few minutes away. I heard a snap of a twig, making me nearly jump. My head darted in that direction, and when I didn't see anything, I quickly turned back to this abomination before me, but it was gone. Quickly, I took the opportunity to run back. I was twigless when I came back, and my guides asked why I hadn't gathered anything. I quietly told them that I couldn't really find much good kindling, and that I wanted to help them start the fire instead. They looked at me funny but consented. About 2 days later, we were canoeing again. We did a portage and then canoed and portaged again, repeating the process, until we came upon a mother moose and her baby drinking in the water. They were beautiful but intimidating. All of a sudden, I was overwhelmed with this feeling of terror. I was worried. I began to scan the forest around us, and I spotted the thing I'd seen before just 2 nights ago. I didn't know what it was, but just having it around me, it made me feel like my world was coming crashing down. My group started to shout at the moose to get them to move. We were in the water, so we should have been safe from any moose attacks. And luckily, the mother moose and baby got the idea. They turned and disappeared into the forest. By the time we reached the shore, the creature had disappeared as well, though I was left horrified at the idea of being in the woods again with that thing. That night, we were roasting marshmallows, the stereotypical camping trip snack. My throat got dry all of a sudden, so I went over to my tent to get some water. And a few minutes later, we went to bed. About 3 hours after that, I woke up, quickly regretting all the water I had drank. It must have been about 1 in the morning if I had to guess. I found myself a nice little spot to relieve myself. I didn't bring a flashlight, but it was okay because the moon was shining brightly in the sky. That was when, once again, the dreadful feeling came over me, as goosebumps sprouted all over my skin. Something about the dark had always freaked me out, but this was different. This was like my body knowing it wasn't alone anymore. It knew I was in danger. I felt this sudden urge to turn around, and soon I did. I saw the creature again, standing on 2 legs. It was closer than ever before, really giving me an idea of how big it was. Its eyes reflected yellow in the moonlight, and it was bony below its neck. And to be real with you, it looked like it had passed away a long time ago. It was more like a walking corpse than a living thing. I screamed, but all that came out was air, no sound. And then I ran back to my tent and hid under a blanket. Somehow I fell back asleep, because the next thing I knew, it was bright out, and we were getting ready to leave the area. Luckily for me, it was the last time I'd see that Wendigo again. Lac Wendigo. Submitted by Ava C. This is a scary experience we had in Algonquin Park in Canada, where we got stuck on a road called Lac Wendigo. My family and I were camping up north for some time, but sadly after 6 days we had to leave. We left early in the morning, around 8. I was with 3 people, my mother Cindy and my 2 cousins Cheryl and Samantha. As we were driving, my mother, being the outdoorsy type, wanted Cheryl to drive through her favorite place, Algonquin Provincial Park. It was simply gorgeous. I was 8 the last time we went, so I hadn't remembered much, and I was excited to go. I was too busy taking photos to realize Cheryl had turned down a road with the name Lac Wendigo. It was a very narrow, eerie road. We stopped a few times to have a snack and take some pictures. "I've got to turn around," Cheryl said as she looked for a wide spot to turn. The only problem was, there was nothing but a narrow path. She ended up having to unhook our trailer and back up until she could turn around. In the meantime, black flies and deer flies swarmed all over our car. It got so bad that we had to roll the windows up. Even then, all you could hear was tapping on the glass from the flies ramming into it. Cheryl was finally able to turn her car around, but she had to back up to get the trailer. Both Cheryl and Samantha were panicking. Their faces were both suddenly filled with dread. Everyone got out of the car in a hurry. They were suddenly trying to get the trailer back on the vehicle as fast as they possibly could, and I couldn't understand what the hurry was about. But in no time, they had the thing hooked back up. Then I heard Cheryl curse under her breath as she got back in. They made a point to lock the doors and check that the windows were all the way up. Then we sped out of there, and I swear, we were going so fast, I thought we'd lose control at any second. The whole time this was happening, a feeling of being watched was coming over me, and just as we were taking off, that feeling was at its strongest. So I couldn't hold back anymore. I turned around in my seat and looked out the back window, and behind me stood something that I'd never forget. There was a tall creature. It looked almost like a moose, but it was standing on its hind legs. It had these solid black eyes with an expression of anger on its face. It stared back at me with those beady black eyes, and I knew if we had stayed there any longer, we may have never left, at least not alive. I tried later to get an explanation from my family, but they never spoke a word, and ever since then, I've had nightmares about that thing. The Wendigo of Algonquin Park, from Queen Bee. Location, Ontario, Canada. This is a story from my Popa. A couple of years ago, he and I were talking about going hiking in Algonquin Provincial Park, somewhere that he had been multiple times and had grown up near. Unfortunately, his health was failing and our trip was cancelled. He told me that it was likely for the best, since he wouldn't be able to protect me from the Wendigo if he saw it. My Popa is half First Nations, with his mother being Cree and Huron, and his father being Scottish. Because his mother was removed from her home as a child and placed into the schools, she lost her status as First Nations and wasn't allowed to live on the res, but she lived just outside of it, near Algonquin Provincial Park. Popa has many friends who lived on the res and would often go with him into the park to hike and hunt when he was a young man. They saw many strange things in the deepest parts of the forest. However, this is the story he shared with me that day. Popa was hiking with a friend named Ben when they were in their late 20s. They had already been out in the park for several days, camping at nightfall and continuing in the morning. They were rather deep in the woods. It was late October and getting colder as the days went on, but they were prepared for that and often camped in the middle of winter. One night, as the temperature dropped below freezing, they decided it was time to set up camp and start a fire. They were starting to gather wood when Popa heard something. It was the crying of a baby or child. Popa had grown up during the Great Depression and had heard stories of people abandoning unwanted babies and children in the forest. He started to follow the crying when Ben grabbed his arm. "Don't go over there, John. It's not what you think it is," Ben said, looking a little pale. "We should move our camp, or that thing will just keep wailing and getting closer." Popa was confused, not understanding what his friend meant. But what if that's someone in need? A kid or another camper who got lost? He broke free from his friend's hand. "I can't leave until I check it out." Ben sighed, but relented. He loaded his hunting rifle and told Popa to do the same before they went to check. The forest was in twilight now as they moved towards the crying. As they broke through a thick patch of trees, they came to an old campsite. There, lying on the ground, was a child that looked to be no older than a year. Popa started walking towards it, but Ben stopped him, telling him to wait. As Popa looked back, the child began to change. It stood up, the legs under it growing long and bent as if it had two sets of knees, each bending in a different direction. Its arms were much the same, with 2 elbows per arm, one bending forward, the other back. Its torso grew the size of a large man. Its ribs were protruding as if threatening to tear through the skin, and its head grew to the size of a man's, but with a mouth so large it took up most of its face. When its jaw unhinged, it began to cry again, as if it was trying to draw them closer to it. Ben began to chant, and the beast screamed as if in pain before running off, knowing that this was not going to be the easy meal it wanted. Popa was frozen to the spot. "What was that, Ben?" "That, John, was a Wendigo, the spirit of a person who became lost in the woods and starved. It is said that the spirit over time becomes twisted and evil. You must never approach one without protecting yourself first. Now let's go move the camp. This is its hunting grounds, and it will be back." Popa is in his late 80s now, and every time he tells this story, he still looks terrified. He's now palliative, meaning his days are numbered, and he asked me to take his ashes to Algonquin Park as he did with Ben's, and scatter them through the woods. But he reminded me never to go alone, lest I come face to face with the Wendigo. They Let Me Go, from summer of 2019. I certainly don't want to be seen as crazy. Even I think that anyone who would tell an account like this would be nothing less than crazy. This happened last summer in Algonquin Park, Ontario, Canada. It's the reason why I'll never go back there. It was a long weekend. Me and my friends had planned weeks before to go up to a camping ground and have a good time. Me being 19 and the youngest of the group, never having camped before, I was a bit nervous, but I became more excited the closer the trip grew. I'd gone to a scout shop and caught a bunch of new camping gear, which I have long since given away. I'm not planning to go camping again after this. So we arrived on the Friday night and set up camp. I was learning from the more experienced campers in the group how to set up my tent and where. There were 6 of us, including me, and I felt relaxed sitting around the campfire the first night, laughing and telling funny stories about school and friends and family. As it got dark, 4 of the group members were tired from the long drive from the city, so they settled into their tents. I stayed up. I was filled with excitement from experiencing my first camping trip. 2 of the others in the group stayed up too, Sarah and Jonathan. They were kind of flirty with each other, but I didn't mind. The campground wasn't very full, which struck me as odd. It was a long summer weekend, and the night was overcast. Looking into the woods, it was pitch black out there. It was rather chilly, and we were low on firewood, so Jonathan proposed that he and I go out and collect some. I was a bit nervous, but I agreed. We left Sarah by the fire, then headed out into the woods with my brand new flashlight. He was using his phone light. Not wanting to go too far, I found a dead fallen tree, so I started to break off arm-length branches. I had to put down the flashlight at one point, so I could snap the tree limbs with both arms. I soon stopped when I heard a crunching in the woods maybe 30 feet in front of me. Thinking that Jonathan was trying to go around and give me a newbie scare, I dropped my pile of firewood and hid behind the dead tree. I turned off the light so I could give him a taste of his own medicine. I heard the crunching growing closer, but a second later in the opposite direction I heard Jonathan calling out to me, back the way I'd come from. So, it wasn't Jonathan. Scared, I stayed silent from the noise of the large footsteps. They were still coming towards me. Then a musky, gross smell hit me. I held my breath and slowly turned, blood roaring in my ears. I looked out over the dead tree from my seated position, and I saw a large, dark shape looking like it was covered in patches of fur and standing on 2 legs. In a second, I was up on my feet, running back to the campsite, not caring that I had dropped my flashlight in my haste. When I was back in camp, I was slightly shaken. Sarah and Jonathan looked at me confused and asked what was wrong. I described what I heard and saw, and Jonathan just laughed it off, saying that I was spooked by a bear looking for food around the camp. They made a joke about me becoming its dinner, but Sarah said it was probably more scared of me than I was of it. I highly doubt that. Not impressed and feeling a bit more relaxed after the explanation, I went into my single man's tent for the night. All I wanted to do was sleep, coming down from my adrenaline rush. The next morning, I went back, looking for where I left my flashlight, but I couldn't find it. I was disappointed. I spent a lot of money on that thing, but crap happens, I guess. That day we spent cooking around the fire, playing games like soccer and going on hikes. I opted not to go on any hikes and volunteered to watch the camp. I was a little nervous about what was out there, and all my friends agreed. We needed someone to look after the camp after all. While Canadians are nice, not all of them are, and petty theft happens at campsites all the time. So they left on their walk around 1 p.m. I estimated that they'd be back around 3 or 4. I sat at the fire reading a novel I'd brought just in case I got bored. Soon the fire was low again. By then it was 3 p.m. I decided I'd rather go out and get firewood while it was still light out, not wanting to risk running into that large thing again. I set my book aside, and I went into the woods the opposite way I went the previous night. By about 40 feet into the woods, I'd managed to get a good pile in my arms, when I was hit with that smell again. I quickly turned to head back, but I froze, dropping the pile of twigs and branches in my arms. There it was, the creature from the night prior, sitting up in a maple tree about 15 feet from the ground looking down at me. It looked like a large wolf, sick and wrong and skeletal, with a large scar on its left shoulder. Its eyes were yellow, with the dark parts trained on me. It realized I was looking at it. It looked like it started to smile. It was showing its yellow, sharp teeth. Then it jumped to the ground, landing with a heavy thud. When they say you get frozen in fear, I knew then what that felt like. I couldn't move. Primal fear took hold. The thing tilted its head at me and took a step forward, then another. That's when I noticed it was holding something in its skeletal wolf-human hand. It was my flashlight from last night. It seemed to smile wider, as if it stopped 10 feet from me and held out the flashlight to me, almost like it wanted me to take it. Then it slowly crushed it, the plastic and glass cracking ominously in the woods. It dropped what was left at its feet. I shook, tremors coursing down my spine. I heard more rustling in the trees around me, and then the whispers. Whispers that came close and grew loud. With us, come with us, come with us. But then there were other whispers mixed in. Leave. You don't belong here. Go away. Some beckoned me. Others warned me to get away. It was all garbled together, and out of the corner of my eyes I saw dark shapes around me. My eyes were glued to the large one in front of me, though. That's when I blacked out. I don't remember anything after that. Not until I woke up. When I came to, it was dark, and I was beside the campfire. My friends were prodding me gently. They asked if I was okay, and if I needed to go to the hospital. My eyes felt heavy, and I was confused. I looked up to see 5 very concerned friends. They informed me that when they got back, I was gone. They looked around and found me in the tree line, just by the campsite. My head was covered in dried blood. They asked if I remembered falling, and if I did, how hard. They asked if I was attacked, too. I slowly sat up and felt the back of my head. It hurt like mad, and it was matted with dry blood like they said. I looked at my friends, confused. I wasn't just in the tree line, I was a bit away from the tree line. And those things... Cold rushed through my veins. I don't know why, but all I said was that I tripped and hit my head while going to look for firewood, and that I felt horrible. I wanted to leave. My friends nodded their heads, said they were already starting to pack up so they could take me to the hospital. They finished loading up the cars and truck. We left soon after, and I kept my eyes closed the whole ride back. I was too scared to see anything out the window for as long as we were still within the woodland areas. I didn't want to see those eyes staring back into mine. I'll never go camping again. I've learned my lesson that there are far worse things than mosquitoes and bears in Canada's woods. I feel like some of those creatures didn't want to do me harm, but others did, and I have no idea why they let me go. Who knows for sure? I'll never find out. In fact, I don't think I'll ever feel the need to even want to find out. That brings us to the end of this episode of Darkness Prevails. More terrifying stories are on the way soon, so subscribe and smash that like button. By the way, did you know this show is available as a podcast called Unexplained Encounters? Just search for, follow, and rate Unexplained Encounters on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. This show is part of the EerieCast network. Go to EerieCast.com for more scary podcasts, such as Freaky Folklore, which explores your favorite monsters, myths, and mysteries, as well as Redwood Bureau, a fictional horror podcast about an agent on the run from an evil secret organization that captures supernatural creatures and entities. Well, thanks for tuning in. Stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.